Hey everyone, I am here today to answer one of the most challenging questions that every goat owner faces. And that question actually has nothing to do with your goats. It has to do with the information that you find online about how to raise your goats. Probably the biggest frustration that people tell me that they have is that if they have a question, they get so many different answers when they look for it online. Um, and so, what I'm going to tell you today is basically what you need to do whenever you have a question for Google. Obviously, you've got to use some kind of a search engine to find your information online. The problem is, Google is not smart. Google knows nothing about goats. Google knows nothing about the validity of each website. All Google knows is that lots of people have visited a website or not. And lots of people have spent a lot of time on a website or not. So, what Google puts at the top of the page is not going to be the most reliable information. It's going to be the web pages that have had the most traffic, where people have stayed the longest, and things like that. And now, unfortunately, Google has tried to start answering questions, which has made things even worse. So, what I'm going to talk about today is how you can try to find the right information on Google. Of course, you can always ask us here at Thrifty Homesteader. You can ask, on our website when you're looking at articles and stuff on our Facebook page and YouTube and all that. But if you do look up questions on Google, you need to make sure that you are reading something that is current. So I'm going to share my screen here with you so that you can see. So here you go. So basically what I did was I typed into Google how often to deworm goats. So what you have at the top of the page is Google's incredibly pathetic attempt to answer that question. And the first one here, it says they should be dewormed every 4 weeks until they turn 16 weeks old, which makes me want to throw things at my computer and scream, because that is a horrible, horrible answer. Unfortunately, this is from the Happy Chicken Coop, which nobody there is an expert on worms or anything. Sad that this was published in 2022, because that's actually fairly current. However, one thing I will tell you, this is a website that is basically created to generate a lot of traffic. And so they go through and they update things to get a newer date on there so that Google thinks that things are more updated than they really are. But there is first of all, the correct answer to this question is that you don't deworm on a schedule. I just did another podcast episode with Dr. Posado from Mississippi State last week on this topic. So if you want to know the right answer to this, Dr. Posado, we talked about this, and we talked about all the myths associated with it. And we started to talk about a little bit about how you can't trust Google to give you the right answer on this, because there is just so much old information out there on the web, and Google keeps sending people to the old pages with the old information. So anyway, just think about this too. It's a website about chickens, and they've got goat deworming information here. The other thing is, the other site here is mom.com. Which again, mom.com is one of those websites that just tries to be everything to everybody. And so they're not going to be an expert on anything in particular. And they talk about worming 4 to 6 times a year. One of the big red flags to me is altered males. They refer to as withers. Withers are like the shoulders of a goat. A castrated male is a wether, W-E-T-H-E-R. So if they don't even know what a castrated male is called, then it's not surprising that they don't know how often they should be dewormed, and that they actually should not be dewormed on any kind of a schedule whatsoever. And then you've got all of these here, which I'm not going to go through all of these, but how often do you need to deworm a goat? Oh, actually, this is very convenient. Deworm every 4 to 6 weeks through September, because this is actually from Mississippi State University, which is #1. Okay. So this is one of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about. I already have pulled up this page here. So when you click on this, it's actually a PDF. It is from Mississippi State University. You know, I just said a minute ago that I interviewed Dr. Posado from Mississippi State University a week ago on my podcast. I've actually interviewed him multiple times on my podcast. So you would see this, right? And you would think, oh, well, Dr. Posado has been on the Love of Goats podcast multiple times talking about worm control. He's from the University of Mississippi, or Mississippi State. So the URL here says extension.mississippistate.edu. This should be credible, right? Well, so you look at this and it says January, February, deworm does as they kid, or deworm the entire group just prior to the onset of kidding. Wrong. That is absolutely so outdated. And then you look down here. In May, it says deworm kids. Oh, and in April is where it says deworm every 4 to 6 weeks through September. Wrong. And then it gets worse. Change to clean pasture at each deworming. Again, wrong. They used to say this like 15 years ago. You deworm the whole group and then you move them to a clean pasture. And what they found out happened when they did that is that basically you got dewormer resistance faster, because every worm that's being moved to that new pasture is going to be carrying, every goat that is moved to that new pasture is going to be carrying worms that are resistant to the dewormer that you just used. So the only eggs being dropped on that pasture are for worms that are resistant to that dewormer. So that's in the larva. So if you leave them there, then they're going to consume larvae. The only larvae they're going to consume are from goats, from worms that are resistant to that dewormer that you just used. So anyway, it just goes on. November, deworm 2 to 3 weeks after hard freeze. Like there's so much deworming here. Like I'm reading this and going, wow, this is really old. So the first thing that I tell people is, like, when you see something like this, look at the top of the page and then look on the very bottom of the last page. A lot of times that is where they put the date that something is published. Also look for a header or footer, because a lot of headers and footers will have that information. They don't have that here, but they do have a reference list. So let's look at the references that they use. The first one has no date in it, and neither does the second one. The other thing I noticed too here is that there's not any URLs to websites. Who does not include URLs in this day and age? Number 3, also no date. Oh, finally, number 4 here. Goat production, academic press, 1981. Wow, this is an oldie. Not a goodie. This is an oldie with a lot of old information in it. They're referencing something from 1981. And then number 5, Goat Medicine by Mary Smith. Well, that's a really good book, right? Yeah, 1994. This is so old, y'all. The Goat Medicine is like on its 3rd edition now. The 3rd edition for Goat Medicine just came out last year. And I have it. It's like right here. This is the 3rd edition of Goat Medicine that just came out last year. And this PDF here is quoting the 1st edition from 1994. Do you think stuff has changed a lot in all these years? Yeah. And you just keep going on. And like everything you find here is so old. Advances in Sheep and Goat Medicine from 1990. Sheep and Goat Medicine from 1983. Like this is all incredibly old. Sheep and Goat Medicine from 2002. Again, yeah, Sheep and Goat Medicine by David Pugh is a great book. It was revised. It's also in its 3rd edition, and it was revised like 2 or 3 years ago. So this is all incredibly old. So if you just look at the dates of the things in here, you can see this is really old. And stuff has changed a lot. Would you want to go to the doctor and have them use information from 1981 and the 1990s to treat you? No, like science changes a lot over time. And this is a really, really old bit of information. And unfortunately, what happens is these pages get lost on websites. Like I'm sure Mississippi State has a lot of newer stuff on their website. And instead of deleting this from their website, they just don't link to it anymore. But Google doesn't know that. And lots of other people link to it. Like lots of other people have linked to this on their websites. And so that's all Google sees. I mean, it is really hard to rank number one on Google for something. And it's killing me that this ancient history PDF is ranking number one on here when you Google how often to deworm goats. It is giving you information that is 20 to 40 years old. So that is really frustrating. So then some of these other ones are also not good. Like it's frustrating, really sad that Grit Magazine has a 2019 article that says that you should deworm a doe 24 hours after she gives birth. That was not recommended in 2019. So that is sad. And then here's another one that's really sad. And again, this is a situation where a page just got lost on a credible website. And here's the thing too. I want to say this. Every domain has an authority. The domain authority of my website is in the 40s, which is one reason that I am down here at number 8, because a lot of what's higher than me are university websites. The University of Maryland, Cornell University, and Mississippi State, because university websites have domain authority that is in the 90s. And so Google assumes that their information is more credible, which is unfortunate. So let's click on this dewormer chart from Cornell University. Okay. You go here and this is awesome. Like, yeah, this is Cornell College of Veterinary Medicine, right? Surely this is good, right? Wrong. This was good in 2014. Right there, updated September 2014. This is the same chart that the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control used. Dr. Kaplan, this is the chart that they use. And this is what they were using until a couple years ago when they updated it. So this is actually much better than 95% of the information that's out there. But wouldn't you rather have the information from 2021 rather than the information from 2014? So it's really sad that these pages get lost on these websites that have a lot of domain authority. And so Google keeps ranking them. I don't know if the 2021 revised chart is on Cornell's website somewhere else and they just stopped linking to this page. But the fact is that for pages to get really high, it means there are thousands of other pages that link to them. And so all of those other pages would need to remove that link to get rid of the authority for that particular page. Because there's page authority and there's domain authority. Or what needs to happen really is that the webmaster of this website needs to just delete this page. Which unfortunately has not happened. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is this flyer here, this PDF that somebody, when we had a post about worms at the end of April that was very controversial, somebody pulled up this and said, this is my research. This is where my information is coming from. And it was very old information. She was talking about doing things that were very old. She also talked about worms burrowing into the stomach, which we talk about this. I talked about this with Dr. Posado, and he said, that's actually a cattle worm. So it's not a goat worm that burrows into the stomach. It's a cattle worm. And so anyway, this is a really old thing too. Well, how would you know that? So again, look at the top. I don't see a date. However, when you page all the way to the bottom here, it's tiny, but it's right there at the bottom. If I put this up to about 200%, you can see right there, it says new 8/06, August 06. And you're like, well, how do you know that's really the date? Maybe that's not the date. Maybe that's something else. All right. Well, first of all, that's pretty much where they always put them, is on the last page. And that is a date format. But let's go ahead and look at their references, because anything that's published, like I have references in my articles. Okay. And so you can check my references, and I have links so that you can like go to studies and stuff. So if you look at the references used here, we have 1997 right here, a book called Internal Parasites, 1997. And then here, another book, Internal Parasites of the Goat, 2005. Over here on this side, Control of Internal Parasites in Sheep, October 2003. Ann Wells, Integrated Parasite Management for Livestock, April 1999. May 1997. So this is very, very old. Like, it looks nice and stuff, but this is very old. 2004. There's Dr. Kaplan again, the one who did that chart in 2014 that's on the Cornell website. But this is from 2004. And you know, I can tell. And then here we've got April 2000, May 1998. So again, we have very old information here. This is all from, 20 years ago or older. And we don't want to be treating our goats with information that is what we thought was true 20 years ago, because I've been raising goats since 2002. And I can tell you, I learned all this the hard way. I did all of this stuff. And I had goats dying left and right from worms because we were doing all the wrong things. And it wasn't until I started reading all of the current research that we got control of our worm problems. So I also, there was another one here. And also just, we talk about this with Dr. Posado last week on the podcast, and we should put a link to the podcast if you want to hear that. But like a farm that says, like, you never know what the story is behind a farm. So our schedule is based on rotating dewormer every 3 months. Again, that's really old. So, and we talk in the podcast with Dr. Posado, we say, you don't know where that person is. If somebody lives in, Arizona, Colorado, high mountains of California, basically if goats are in the desert, people can do all the things wrong and they will not have worm problems because they just don't have worms, and the worms can't survive in their environment. So be very careful. Like, if you're living in Georgia and you try to raise your goats like somebody that's living in Arizona, your goats are going to be dying. And I know this is true because I get people contacting me who used to live on the West Coast and they've been raising goats 10 or 15 years. They really think they know what they're doing. They've never lost a goat to worms. They moved to the East Coast and all of a sudden they've got goats dying. Like, literally been contacted by people who've been on the East Coast for 3 months and have had multiple goats die from parasites already, and they don't know why. And the first thing they say is like, I've been raising goats for 10 or 15 years and I'm not doing anything different, because they don't realize that their environment was why they didn't have any problems with goats and worms when they lived out west in the desert, because they're desert animals. So anyway, I hope that has helped so that you can that you can understand better when you find something that you need to search through there and see when it was published, see when the references, see how old the references are for what they are referencing, so that you know that you are not treating your goats with information that people thought was current 20 years ago. Because I can tell you personally, I treated my goats with those practices 20 years ago, and we had lots of goats dying from worms and ultimately dealt with complete dewormer resistance to all the worms And as I say, Mother Nature culled my herd. And basically any goat that was not resistant or resilient wound up dying. And so I know that's one reason I don't have a lot of problems with worms now. I'm doing all the things right, though. I'm doing the rotating pastures. I never use dewormers unless a goat really needs it. I do not deworm more than once. And, you know, and as a matter of practice, like there's no second deworming. The most important thing, if you treat a goat with worms, is to get them off the pasture until their FOMACHA score returns back to normal. Because treating them with a dewormer while leaving them on a pasture where they're just going to continue to get reinfected is not going to be helping them. So someone on YouTube commented, I live in Georgia, miserably hard to control worms here, no doubt. Yes, it is. And I just sold 4 goats to somebody in Georgia 2-3 weeks ago. And I was so excited when they told me that they have Sericea lespedeza growing wild on their farm. And they're also able to buy Sericea lespedeza hay. So that's really awesome. If you live in Georgia, you really need to know all the latest information and know what all the best practices are, because you are living in worm central if you're in the Southeast US, where you've got your temperatures don't get super, super cold in the winter and you get a lot of rain. And it's basically like the perfect breeding ground. If you were an intestinal goat worm farmer, you could reproduce, like those worms reproduce like crazy in the rainy southeastern US. So if anybody's watching this later and you have questions, feel free to comment and we'll get back to you. And I'm also, when I get off of this, we're also going to add the link to the podcast I did last week with Dr. Posado, where we talk about a lot of the myths. And I think I'll also add the link to the previous episode I did with him, where we talked about the new dewormer guidelines. So you can also see that. So there's no reason for anybody to be using 20-year-old information in raising their goats when we've got the current research available. And I know, like, it has made such an incredible difference for my herd to be able to have that information. So take care. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye for now.